I never thought money could destroy a family as fast as it did mine. If you had told me just a year ago that my own father would look me in the eyes, tell me I was worthless, and throw me out of his mansion the same day he became a multi-millionaire, I would have laughed in your face. But that's exactly what happened. And the part that still shakes me isn't just the betrayal, it's what happened 24 hours later, when he came crawling back, begging for my help, his pride shattered, his voice cracking in ways I never thought I'd hear. But I'll start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about money. It's about love, betrayal, humiliation, and revenge that tasted sweeter than I could have ever imagined. Growing up, we didn't have much. My dad always dreamed of striking it big, whether through lottery tickets, shady business deals, or half-baked schemes he never followed through on. My mom held our family together, and I always admired her strength. She passed away when I was 17, and from then on, it was just me and him. I worked my way through school, picking up side jobs to help cover bills, while Dad kept chasing the dream. He'd call me responsible, but always with this mocking edge, like he resented the fact that I wasn't living recklessly like him. Fast forward to this year. I was 26, working 2 jobs, bartending nights and doing freelance graphic design by day. I wasn't rich, but I was proud of the independence I'd built. Meanwhile, Dad had been scraping by, working part-time gigs, and talking endlessly about one big break. I had gotten used to tuning it out. Until one morning, everything changed. He walked into the bar where I worked with the biggest grin I had ever seen plastered on his face. His hands were shaking as he pulled me aside and whispered, "Son, you won't believe it. I did it. I won." I thought he was joking, but he pulled out the paper slip. He had just cashed in a lottery ticket worth $56 million. My jaw dropped. For the first time, I saw him not as the dreamer who never followed through but as the man who actually did it. We hugged. He cried. And for one brief moment, I believed maybe this was it. Maybe this was the turning point for both of us. But I was wrong. The money didn't just change him, it turned him into someone I didn't even recognize. Overnight, he became arrogant, dismissive, and cruel. He bought a massive mansion, luxury cars, clothes worth more than my yearly rent. And when I hesitated to move in with him, because I didn't want to abandon my own life, he snapped. "Don't be ungrateful," he sneered. "Do you know how many kids would kill to be in your shoes? I don't want you living like some loser in a rented apartment while I'm a millionaire. You'll embarrass me." That was the first crack. I brushed it off, thinking he was just overwhelmed. But then came the parties. He invited distant relatives who had ignored us for years, old friends who used to mock him, and strangers who only cared about his bank account. Suddenly, he was parading me around like some trophy, introducing me as my son, the artist, but with this sarcastic twist, like he was mocking me in front of his new friends. I tried to talk to him one night, tried to remind him that money didn't have to change the way he treated people. But he cut me off, cold and sharp. "You don't get it. I'm not a loser anymore. And I don't need dead weight around my neck. If you can't keep up, get out." I thought he was bluffing, but the next day, he proved me wrong. He called me into his office, tossed an envelope on the desk. It had a measly $5,000 in it, and said, "This is all you're getting. Go figure out your life somewhere else. You're not welcome here anymore." My chest tightened like I couldn't breathe. This was the man who raised me, the man I sacrificed for after Mom died, the man whose bills I covered when he couldn't. And he was throwing me away like trash. I left that mansion with nothing but my backpack and the sound of his new friends laughing in the background. That night, I stayed on a friend's couch, humiliated, angry, and broken. My dad had everything he ever wanted, and I had nothing, not even the dignity of being part of his life anymore. But then came the twist, the part that still feels surreal. Less than 24 hours later, my phone buzzed. It was my dad. And when I answered, his voice wasn't cocky anymore. It was panicked. "Son, I need your help. Please." At first, I thought it was a joke. But the desperation in his tone was real. He told me he had made a mistake, one that could cost him everything. And suddenly, the tables turned. I froze when I heard his voice. The same man who told me I was dead weight, who threw me out like garbage just a day earlier, was now begging for me to come back. My stomach twisted with anger, but also with a flicker of curiosity. I wanted to know what could have possibly broken through his pride in less than 24 hours. So I asked him what happened. It turned out that in his whirlwind of arrogance, he had trusted the wrong people. At the party the night before, one of his so-called business partners had convinced him to invest a massive portion of his winnings into a too-good-to-be-true venture. My dad, drunk on both champagne and pride, had signed away access to almost $30 million without even reading the fine print. By morning, he realized he had been scammed. Worse, the contract was ironclad. He needed help fighting it, and the only person he thought of was me, his loser's son, who actually knew about contracts, design work, and digital forensics. I wanted to laugh in his face. But instead, I let the silence hang. He stammered, "Son, please. I don't know who else to turn to." I should have hung up. I should have told him to enjoy the bed he made. But something in me, some twisted combination of loyalty and the craving for revenge, made me say, "Fine. I'll come over. But this time, things are going to be on my terms." When I walked back into the mansion, the vibe was completely different. Gone was the confident, smug father surrounded by sycophants. He was pacing the floor, sweating, with piles of paperwork scattered everywhere. His friends were gone, of course. The same people who laughed at me while I was kicked out had vanished the moment the money was at risk. He rushed up to me like I was some kind of savior. "Thank God you're here. I need you to look at this." He shoved the contract into my hands, his fingers trembling. I read through it carefully. The more I scanned, the angrier I got, not just at the scammers, but at him. It was exactly what I warned him about the night before. He had signed without thinking, ignoring me when I tried to remind him that money could blind people. And now, here he was, crumbling, begging for the same help he had dismissed. When I finally looked up, he was staring at me like a broken man. "Can you fix it?" he whispered. I took a deep breath. "Maybe. But it's not going to be easy. And if I do this, things between us change. Permanently." His face fell, but he nodded quickly, desperate. For the first time, I had the power. And I intended to use it. I sat down at the massive mahogany desk my father had bought just days earlier, the kind that screamed wealth but looked completely out of place in his hands. He hovered behind me like a lost child as I sifted through the paperwork. Every clause, every signature, every predatory line was like a slap in the face. They had played him like a fool. The so-called investment wasn't an opportunity, it was a siphon. If nothing was done, within weeks, half his winnings would be drained and transferred offshore. And the irony? He could have prevented all of this if he'd just listened to me when I warned him about fast talkers and shady deals. The same son he called useless was now the only one standing between him and financial ruin. "Do you know these guys?" I asked, pointing at the company name and email address at the bottom. He swallowed hard and shook his head. "Met them through a friend of a friend," he muttered. "They seemed legit. They promised me the returns would be 10 times the initial stake. Everyone said it was a golden opportunity. Everyone." I turned in my chair, staring at him. "Or the crowd you invited over to party last night. The ones laughing when you threw me out." He flinched, his eyes darting to the floor. For once, there was no bravado in his posture. He looked small, almost ashamed. Almost. I sighed and rubbed my temples. This isn't just some scam I can wave a magic wand at. It's going to take digging, patience, and strategy. And if I do it, you follow my lead. No questions, no arguments. Understood. He nodded so fast it almost looked comical. The same man who sneered at me a day ago was now treating me like the only adult in the room. So I got to work. I traced the email headers, dug into the domain, cross-referenced the company name against databases. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. And what I found was worse than I thought. These weren't just con artists, they were professionals. They had a trail of shell companies, fake addresses, and even lawyers on their payroll to intimidate victims. My father had stepped into a pit of vipers, and the only way out was to expose them before they drained him dry. Hours passed. My father brought me coffee, water, even food, trying to appease me like I was some king. I ignored him and kept digging. Finally, I found a crack. One of the shell corporations was tied to a sloppy digital signature that led back to a real identity, a man already under investigation for fraud. If I could get this to the right authorities, there was a chance to freeze the assets before they vanished. I looked at my father, who was sitting anxiously on the edge of a leather chair. We can stop them. But you need to be ready for a fight. This isn't just about signing a paper, it'll mean lawsuits, publicity, maybe even the FBI knocking on your door. Are you ready for that? His face paled. Whatever it takes, he whispered. I nodded. Good. Then from now on, you shut up and do exactly as I say. For the first time in my life, he didn't argue. He agreed. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just helping him, I was taking control. The next morning, I drafted an official notice disputing the contract, citing fraud and misrepresentation. I forwarded the evidence I had to a lawyer friend of mine, someone I trusted, not one of his vultures. Then I crafted an email to the scammers, letting them know we were onto them. I worded it carefully, making it clear that if they didn't back off, law enforcement would be knocking at their door. When I hit send, my father was practically shaking. Do you think they'll just walk away? He asked. I leaned back, staring at him. Not because of you. But because of me. Maybe. I know how these people think. They prey on desperation. They don't like attention. And I just lit a spotlight on them. Sure enough, within hours, the phone calls started. First, smooth-talking voices trying to reassure my dad that everything was fine. Then, more aggressive tones, threatening lawsuits and penalties. My dad panicked, pacing the room like a trapped animal. But I held firm. Don't answer unless I tell you to. Every word you say can be twisted. He obeyed. For once, he actually listened. By the second day, the threat stopped. The scammers had gone quiet. I knew what that meant, they were retreating, cutting their losses, and moving on to easier prey. We had won. When the final email came, an abrupt termination notice of the agreement, my dad collapsed into the chair with tears streaming down his face. You saved me, he whispered. I don't know how to thank you. I stared at him, my heart heavy. Part of me wanted to scream, to remind him that 24 hours earlier he had called me worthless and tossed me aside. But another part of me, the one that still remembered late nights when it was just the two of us after Mom died, wanted to believe this meant something. You don't thank me, I said finally. You change. Because if you ever treat me like that again, you'll lose me for good. He nodded furiously, like a man clinging to a lifeline. I will. I promise. You're all I've got. But promises are easy when you're desperate. The real test would come later. And I already knew, deep down, That money had poisoned him in ways I couldn't if I axed it. In the days that followed, my father treated me differently. He hovered around me, asking for advice on everything from emails to grocery deliveries, like he was afraid of making another mistake. On the surface, it seemed like he had been humbled, like nearly losing half his fortune had shaken him awake. He apologized constantly, told me he was proud of me, even suggested we start fresh as father and son. And for a moment, I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that the man who had thrown me out like I was nothing had finally realized my worth, that we could put the bitterness and betrayal behind us and build something real. But deep down, I knew better. Money has a way of stripping people down to their true selves, and what I saw in him wasn't gratitude, it was fear. He wasn't treating me with respect because he suddenly valued me, he was clinging to me because I had become useful. The mask slipped soon enough. One evening, not even a week after the whole ordeal, I overheard him bragging on the phone to one of his new friends. He wasn't telling them how I had saved him, how my persistence and knowledge had exposed the scam and forced them to back down. No, he was claiming that he had outsmarted the scammers himself, that he had handled it like a pro, and that his son had just helped with some computer stuff. My jaw clenched as I listened, my hands shaking with the urge to storm into the room and confront him. But I didn't. Instead, I let the anger simmer, let it carve itself into my memory like stone. That was the moment I knew, he would never change. He would never see me as an equal, never admit that I was the reason he still had money in his bank account. He wanted to erase me from the narrative of his success just like he had erased me from his mansion the day he told me to leave, and that was when the idea of revenge began to take root, slow and steady, curling inside me like smoke. Not the kind of revenge that would destroy him outright, I wasn't going to sink to his level, but the kind that would make him choke on his pride, the kind that would force him to finally face the truth of who he had become. Over the next few weeks, I quietly began pulling back. I stopped answering his calls right away, stopped jumping at every question or crisis he manufactured that he noticed, of course. He became clingier, more desperate, like a child afraid of being abandoned, and then, when he least expected it, I cut him off completely. No warnings, no explanations. I changed my number, moved out of town, and went silent. That it didn't take long for the calls to find me anyway. Desperate voicemails, emails full of apologies and half-hearted promises. He told me he couldn't handle managing the money alone, that people were circling like sharks and he needed me to guide him. He begged me to come back, to be his right hand, his trusted partner. And every time I listened to his messages, I remembered the sound of his voice the day he threw me out, the cruel laughter of his friends, the envelope with $5,000 shoved in my hands like that was all my existence was worth. The pain of that moment burned away any pity I might have felt. I never answered. Not once. Instead, I focused on myself. I poured all the energy I had once wasted trying to earn his approval into my own work, building my career piece by piece, project by project. And slowly, something incredible happened. Clients who had once overlooked me began to notice, opportunities began to grow, and before long, I had built something I was proud of. Not millions, not luxury mansions or flashy cars, but stability, independence, and a life that was entirely mine. Months later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that my father had started slipping again. Surrounded by hangers-on, he made reckless decisions, gave money away to people who flattered him, and invested in schemes that crumbled just as quickly as they appeared. The fortune that once seemed endless was bleeding away, dollar by dollar, deal by deal. He had everything and still managed to turn it into nothing, because at the core of it all, he never learned. He never listened. He never valued the people who truly cared about him. The last time I heard from him directly, it was another voicemail, his voice cracked and broken, admitting that he was scared. He said he didn't know who to trust anymore, that everyone wanted something from him, and that he wished he had treated me better when he had the chance. For the first time, he sounded like a man who realized what he had lost. Not just the money, but me. And that was my revenge, Not anger, not confrontation, but absence. My silence became louder than any words I could have shouted, louder than any lecture or fight. Because in the end, he had to live with the knowledge that he had destroyed the only real relationship that mattered, not because of poverty, not because of bad luck, but because of his own greed and arrogance. He had millions in his hands, and he threw me out like I was nothing. And when the millions started to slip away, he came crawling back, only to find that I was gone for good. People ask me sometimes if I regret it, if I wish I had forgiven him, if maybe I should have been the bigger person. But here's the truth, I was the bigger person. I gave him a chance when he least deserved it. I saved him when no one else would. And he still spit in my face. My revenge wasn't about money, it wasn't about making him suffer financially, it was about finally proving to myself that I didn't need his approval, his wealth, or his validation. I walked away with nothing, and yet somehow, I ended up with everything that mattered. So when I think back to that day, when my dad got $56 million and threw me out like trash, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel clarity. Because 24 hours later, he was the one begging for my help, and that's when I realized the truth. Money can buy houses, cars, and fake friends, but it can't buy respect. It can't buy loyalty. And once you've thrown those things away, there's no getting them back.